They said, "Stay in the lounge, Grandma. We'll come back for you after check-in." I nodded. Of course I did. That's what you do when your son gives you an instruction in that clipped, over-patient voice. The one reserved for the elderly, the confused, and the inconvenient. I sat where they told me, next to a dusty potted plant between a crying toddler and a flickering television tuned to a weather channel. It was 9:15 a.m. I waited 8 hours. I'd packed 3 days before, laid out every outfit on the bed like I used to do for Adam's school trips. The tickets were to Honolulu, our big family vacation, as Lisa, my daughter-in-law, called it. She'd insisted on matching t-shirts for the kids and me. Mine said Vacation Nana in bright pink letters. I didn't like it, but I wore it anyway. She'd rolled her eyes at the airport when I brought my own snacks. At the security line, things started to feel off. Lisa kept glancing at her watch. Adam was unusually quiet. The kids were on their phones. When the TSA agent asked about seating, Lisa laughed and said, "Oh, we'll sort that later." And that was the last time anyone looked me in the eye. Once we passed security, Lisa turned to me with that same brittle smile. "Mom, why don't you stay in the lounge? We'll go ahead to check in the bags, sort the kids' boarding passes, and then come get you. Just relax. You've done enough." She patted my arm. It wasn't affection. It was dismissal. I sat. I waited. I watched them disappear into the crowd. After an hour, I stood up and paced near the window. After 2, I asked the front desk to page Adam. No response. By the 4th hour, I stopped looking at the entrance. People around me came and went. Flights announced and departed. The woman across from me had lunch, made 2 phone calls, and left. I stayed. It wasn't until 5 p.m. that I asked the clerk at the front for help. I gave Adam's full name. She typed, hesitated, and glanced at me carefully. They checked into the 1:45 p.m. flight to Honolulu. "Ma'am, it's already departed." I nodded. Then I asked her to repeat it. She did slowly. Her voice was kind. I remember that. So that was it. They'd boarded without me. Not by accident, not a mistake. I knew my son. He was a lot of things, but careless wasn't one of them. I stepped into the restroom, locked the stall, sat down not to cry. I didn't have it in me. I just needed to sit where no one would ask if I was all right. When I emerged, the airport was shifting into evening mode. The buzz had dimmed. I walked to the departure screen and stared at Adam. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I simply looked at the list like a woman looking at options in a diner. And then I saw it. Portland, 7:35 p.m. I don't know why I chose Portland. Maybe because I hadn't seen it in decades. Maybe because it was where I once learned to ride a bike. Maybe because it was the furthest thing from Hawaii. I walked to the counter. "1 ticket to Portland," I said. "Tonight," the young woman hesitated. "Round trip?" "No, just one way." I used my own card from my own account. The one Adam didn't know about. The one I'd kept open since before his wedding. I had just enough for the fare, a motel, and maybe a start. I didn't need more. I turned off my phone. No messages, no missed calls. Of course not. The boarding process was quiet. No one asked why I was traveling alone. No one looked at my shirt. I'd taken it off and stuffed it in the trash before heading to the gate. On the plane, I watched the lights of the city fall away beneath me. 8 hours ago, I thought I was going to paradise. Turns out I was just being left behind. But now I was going somewhere real. Somewhere they couldn't follow. I landed in Portland just after 10 o'clock. The airport was quieter than I remembered, smaller somehow. Or maybe it was me who had shrunk, folded inward from the weight of a day like no other. I walked slowly through the terminal, not because of my age, but because I didn't feel the need to rush anymore. No one was waiting for me, and for once, that felt like freedom. Outside, the air was damp and sharp. Rain had fallen recently. It smelled like concrete and pine. I stood under the awning for a minute, just breathing. Then I found a bench and sat down with my carry-on, the same one Adam had mocked for being too old school. It was brown leather worn at the corners, the kind Derek gave me for our 25th anniversary. He would have laughed at what happened in today. A deep, knowing laugh, the kind that said, "Well, sweetheart, what did you expect?" I didn't expect this. Not really, but I also wasn't surprised. I opened my wallet. 2 cards, 1 ID, $76 in cash, and a folded piece of paper with an address I hadn't used in 50 years. 1849, Quinn Street, my first apartment after marrying Derek. I didn't know if it still existed. I didn't even know why I'd brought the address with me, but there it was. I called a cab. The driver was quiet, a blessing. I gave him the address of a cheap motel I'd looked up before leaving Wilmington, just in case. When we pulled up, I paid without blinking, took my key and climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor, room 207. The hallway smelled like cleaning fluid and tired stories. Inside, the room was small but clean. One bed, one chair, a TV bolted to the wall. I washed my face in the sink and lay down on the bed in my clothes, the blankets scratchy against my arms. I slept without dreams. The next morning, I stood at the window watching a woman in a pink robe walk her dog. She looked about my age, though maybe a little stronger in the back. I made coffee in the little machine on the nightstand and sat in the stiff chair by the window, sipping slowly. No one called, no one texted. I didn't check. I had nowhere to be. That was a strange thing to realize. For decades, my time belonged to others. To Adam, to Derek, to the grandchildren, even to the PTA meetings I stopped going to 20 years ago. But now my time was mine again. At 9, I left the motel and walked into the neighborhood. My legs ached, my hip was murmuring, but I kept going. I stopped at a corner bakery and bought a scone. The woman behind the counter smiled when I handed over exact change. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked. "I used to be a long time ago." "Well," she said, "welcome back." I didn't know if I was back. I wasn't even sure I belonged anywhere, but the words felt warm. I asked her where to find housing listings. She pointed to a corkboard by the door. I scanned the notes. Dog walking, used bike for sale, music lessons, room for rent. That one caught my eye. For quiet lady, private room, shared kitchen, house safe, near bus. No nonsense, no drama. 400-month call Joyce. It was written in blocky, no-nonsense handwriting, like someone who meant what she said. I took a photo of the number. By noon, I'd walked 2 more blocks and found a park bench in the sun. I called. The voice that answered was raspy, skeptical. "Yes, I'm calling about the room for rent," I said. Long pause. "How old are you?" 57. "Are you clean?" "Yes, no boyfriends, right?" I chuckled. "Not in a long time." "Well," she said, "come by at 4, 2185 East Stafford. Bring cash for the first week." Then she hung up. I wrote the address on a napkin. By 4, I stood in front of a faded blue house with a peeling porch and a wind chime that sounded like someone tapping spoons together. Joyce opened the door with a cigarette in one hand and a cat curled around her ankles. "You're the old lady?" she asked. "I suppose I am." She stepped aside. "Come in then. Let's see if we can tolerate each other." Joyce's house smelled like lavender and fried onions. Not unpleasant, just lived in. Like a woman who cooked real meals and didn't fuss over the occasional grease stain. She led me through a narrow hallway stacked with books and magazines into a small sitting room where the television was on mute. A crocheted blanket lay folded on the arm of the sofa. "The room's upstairs," she said, gesturing with her cigarette. I followed her up the creaky stairs, one hand on the banister. The hallway at the top was darker, the paint slightly chipped. She opened the door to a room at the end. This is it. It was small, a twin bed, a nightstand, a dresser that had seen better decades. But the window was wide, and the afternoon sun poured in like it knew something good had finally found me. There was even a little desk with a worn chair. "It's fine," I said. "How much again?" $400 a month, but I take weekly. $100 a week. Hush, no checks, no credit, no soba stories. She looked me over. "You don't seem like the sob story type." "No," I said, "not anymore." She nodded like that was the right answer. Kitchen shared, bathrooms down the hall, no guests without warning. "I like quiet. You cause trouble. You're out. Week clear. Crystal." She handed me a key. "You can stay tonight if you've got the first week's rent." I handed her 5 20s from the envelope I tucked into my inner coat pocket. She folded the bills without counting. "You hungry?" I could eat. Joyce made grilled cheese sandwiches and poured tomato soup from a saucepan. We ate at the small kitchen table under a yellowed ceiling fan. She didn't ask questions, which was a relief. People always ask too soon before you're ready to say it out loud. She only said, "I hate eating alone." And I understood that well enough. After dinner, I unpacked in the small room. I'd only brought 3 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, my medications, and an old paperback novel I never finished. I laid everything out carefully in the dresser, folding each item like it mattered. Maybe it did. That night, I lay in the narrow bed, listening to the sounds of a house not mine, the ticking of a wall clock, the groan of floorboards, the distant sound of Joyce talking softly to the cat. No one called, no one texted. I didn't turn the phone on. In the morning, I made coffee before Joyce was up. The kitchen felt more familiar than my own back home. Maybe because it didn't belong to people who only remembered me when they needed something. By the 3rd day, I started walking the neighborhood. 2 blocks down, there was a small corner cafe with a chalkboard sign out front. Help wanted, morning shift, apply inside. I stood there for a moment. I hadn't worked in 15 years, but I was no stranger to early hours and coffee pots. Inside, the place was simple. 3 booths, a counter, a few bar stools with cracked red cushions. A young woman in an apron was wiping the counter. "You hiring?" I asked. She looked up, surprised. "You want to apply?" "Yes," she called to the back. A stocky woman with her hair in a messy bun emerged. Her name tag read, "Heather." "You have experience?" she asked. "I've raised 3 kids and run a household for 50 years. I can make coffee, carry plates, and I don't call in sick." She stared at me for a beat, then shrugged. "Trial shift tomorrow, 6 to 11. You make it through that, we'll talk." That night, I ironed the only blouse I had that still held a crease. I went to bed early and stared at the ceiling for a long time. It had been less than a week since the airport. Less than a week since I'd been left behind, like forgotten luggage. But something had shifted. I wasn't waiting anymore. Now I was walking, working, beginning. No one needed to know. Not yet. This life, this quiet, new, unexpected life, was mine. The cafe smelled like burnt toast and old hope. I arrived at 5:45, 15 minutes early. The front door was still locked. A man with thick glasses and a flour-stained apron opened it for me without a word. He grunted something that might have been good morning and returned to the kitchen. Heather arrived 10 minutes later, holding a travel mug and a set of keys on a rainbow lanyard. She unlocked the register and handed me an apron without ceremony. "Keep your hair tied back. No perfume. Refill cups without waiting to be asked. And if someone leaves less than $1 tip, that's on you, not them." I nodded. She looked at me for a moment, then softened just a little. "You nervous?" "No," I said. "I'm 77. I've buried a husband, raised a son who forgot my birthday 3 years in a row, and survived 5 colonoscopies." "This is just coffee," Heather snorted. "Fair enough." By 7, the first wave of regulars came in. Contractors, early risers, nurses fresh off the night shift. I moved slow but steady. I remembered orders, poured coffee with a steady hand, smiled without overdoing it. By 9, I found a rhythm. "Where'd they dig you up?" one of the men asked, smiling kindly. "Same place they find everything worth keeping," I said. "The back shelf under a blanket." He laughed and left a $5 tip. Heather watched. She didn't say much, just nodded once after the breakfast rush died down and handed me a clean towel to wipe down the counters. We finished at 11 o'clock. She poured herself another cup of coffee, then pointed to the stool next to her at the counter. "Sit," she said. I did. "You did fine. Just fine, you'll get better." She sipped. "You're hired. It's minimum wage plus tips, no health insurance, but you work steady. I'll give you all the weekday mornings. That enough for you?" "It's more than enough." We sat in silence a moment. "You got kids?" I did. She glanced sideways at me, waiting. "They're traveling," I said simply. She nodded. "They always are." I walked back to Joyce's with sore feet and a strange sense of lightness. She was in the garden pulling weeds in a faded shirt that said, "Don't talk to me." Before coffee, "You get the job?" she called out without looking up. "I did. Told you they need people who show up." That night, we ate frozen pot pies and watched the news with the sound off. The cat, whose name I'd learned was Franklin, curled up between us. "You staying long?" Joyce asked during a commercial. "I don't know. You can as long as you pay rent and don't hog the remote." "I don't even like the remote," I said. She smiled and passed me the last cookie. Later, I sat on the edge of my bed holding my phone. I hadn't turned it on in days. I thought about checking the messages, seeing if Adam had noticed yet. I didn't. Instead, I pulled out the old paperback I'd brought with me and began at the first page. The light from the desk lamp soft and warm against the walls. Outside, rain tapped gently against the glass. Inside, I wasn't someone's leftover. I wasn't a burden or a favor or an afterthought. I was a woman with a room, a chai, a plate of food, and a quiet chair of her own. It was enough. The first paycheck was small, $74.26 after taxes. Heather handed it to me in a thin envelope at the end of my Friday shift. "Cash it or frame it," she said. I smiled and slipped it into my coat pocket. I wasn't used to carrying money that was purely mine. For years, everything I had went to someone else. Groceries for Adam's family, birthday gifts that never got a thank you, co-pays for appointments no one bothered to drive me to. But this was different. I'd earned this standing on my own 2 feet, apron tight, hand steady. I walked to the bank on 3rd and cashed the check. The young teller looked at me like she wasn't sure I understood what I was doing. "I'd like 10 and 5s, please," I said. One's for the rest. When she handed me the bills, I folded them neatly and tucked them into my wallet. I walked out of the bank with my chin a little higher. Across the street was a second-hand clothing shop. Nothing fancy, just a narrow storefront with a cluttered display and a small handwritten sign. Fall specials, 20% off coats. I stepped inside. The bell on the door tinkled softly. A girl barely out of high school looked up from behind the counter and gave me a genuine smile. "Looking for something in particular?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Something that makes me feel like myself again." She didn't laugh, just nodded and started showing me the racks. I chose a navy wool coat with a subtle herringbone pattern and deep pockets. It wasn't new, but it was warm and solid and well-made. I tried it on. It fit like it had been waiting for me. When I paid in cash, the girl wrapped it in tissue as if it were a gift. "You look sharp," she said. "Thank you," I replied. "I feel sharp." That night, I walked home in that coat. It was just cold enough to justify it. Joyce was on the porch with Franklin, sipping wine from a coffee mug. "Where you been?" she asked. "Bought a coat," she whistled. "Look at you, classy lady. Only on Fridays." We went inside and split a can of chili. The heater buzzed like it was clearing its throat. The floor creaked under Joyce's heavy slippers. It was noisy in the way old houses are, a kind of comforting noise like a body you've lived in long enough to recognize by sound. Later, I stood in front of the mirror in my little room. I turned left, then right, ran my hand along the fabric of the coat. It wasn't just clothing, it was proof. I was still here, still standing, still capable of choosing something for myself. For once, no one else had a say. The phone was still off. I hadn't turned it on since I landed. I didn't miss it. I missed people sometimes, but not the kind who leave you by a fake foos plant at an airport and never look back. In the mornings I worked. By noon I walked. In the evenings I read or listened to Joyce's rants about city politics. Every few days I bought myself something small, a pair of wool socks, a crossword book, real tea instead of the dusty bag she kept in a tin above the fridge. I was beginning to understand that there was a life here. Not a grand one, but a good one, and it belonged to me. By the second week, the ache in my feet began to fade. My hands remembered how to carry plates without spilling. I could clear A4 top in under 2 minutes. Heather still didn't say much, but one morning she brought me a cinnamon roll wrapped in foil. "Too many," she muttered, sliding it across the counter. "Take one." That was her way of saying I belonged. I settled into a rhythm. Monday to Friday, I worked mornings. Saturday, I took long walks through unfamiliar neighborhoods. On Sunday, I let myself rest. Joyce didn't hover. She didn't ask where I was going or why I was late. She just grunted when I came in and poured me a glass of something from a box. One evening, she came home with a stack of mail. "Something for you," she said, tossing an envelope onto the table. It had no return address, just my name in a familiar looping script. I stared at it for a moment before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. "Grandma," it read. "Where are you?" I didn't need to see the name. I knew the handwriting. Karen, my oldest grandchild. The only one who used to visit without being asked. The only one who once spent an afternoon building a birdhouse with me, then painted it bright red and said, "This will be the coolest place in the whole yard." The letter was short, just a few lines. "Dad and Lisa are freaking out. They said you disappeared. No one's heard from you. I've been checking every day. I miss you. Please let me know you're okay." There was a phone number scribbled at the bottom. Here's a new one. I sat with the letter in my lap, reading it twice. Then I folded it carefully and tucked it into the drawer of my nightstand. I didn't call. Not yet. But something inside me softened. The next day, I stood at the cafe register counting change. When Heather said, "You've got a visitor," I turned. A man in a gray windbreaker stood just inside the door, peering at the menu like it was written in another language. He looked to be in his early 80s, neatly dressed, clean-shaven, a little unsteady on his feet. When he spotted me, he smiled. "You the one who knows how to make real coffee, yeah?" "Was it sauce, Harvey?" he asked. I poured him a cup and set it down. "Cream and sugar?" I asked. "Just cream, 2 splashes." We didn't talk much at first. He drank slowly, folded the newspaper someone had left behind, and left a tip that was more generous than necessary. He came back the next day and the day after that. By Thursday, I learned his name was Arthur. Widowed, 2 sons, one in Boston, one in Arizona. We didn't talk about them much. Mostly we discussed birds. He liked cardinals. I liked finches. We both agreed crows were smarter than people gave them credit for. On Friday, he brought in a picture of his wife. "Married 46 years, he said. "She made better coffee than this, but you come close." I smiled and refilled his cup. Later that evening, I stood by the window in my room, watching the wind stir the leaves outside. I thought of Arthur's hands wrapped around the mug, Kieran's letter, the navy coat hanging on the back of my door. There were still gaps in this new life, still quiet aches in the middle of the night, but something was taking shape. Not a return to what I'd lost, but a turning towards something I hadn't known I could find. It wasn't forgiveness, it was freedom. The phone stayed off. I kept it in the bottom drawer of my nightstand, wrapped in a clean handkerchief, like something sacred or dangerous. And I wasn't yet sure which. Joyce didn't ask, she wasn't the type. But one evening while we shelled peas in the kitchen, she said, "You hiding or healing?" I looked up from the colander. "Both," I said. She nodded once and went back to the peas. It had been 3 weeks since the airport, since the lounge chair with the broken armrest, since the cheap plastic water bottle Adam pressed into my hand before disappearing. Not a single call had come through, not one attempt that I'd seen to find me, except Kieran. Every now and then I opened his letter. The creases were softening from use. His handwriting reminded me of his mother. The same long loops on the Y's, the same nervous tilt to the right, but I still didn't call. It wasn't punishment. I wasn't cruel. I just wasn't ready to open the door they'd closed without blinking. It takes longer to walk back from silence than it does to fall into it. At the cafe, Heather didn't say much, but she started saving me the crossword page from the morning paper. "You look like the kind of person who finishes what they start," she said. Arthur came every day now, always at 9:10, always in that same gray jacket. He didn't flirt, not exactly, but he lingered a little longer with each visit, told more stories, asked more questions. The kind of questions that aren't nosy, just curious. One morning he asked, "How come a woman like you working the breakfast shift in a place like this?" I looked at him over the rim of the coffee pot. "Because someone left me at an airport lounge like a bag they didn't want to carry anymore." He blinked. "I'm sorry," he said and meant it. "Don't be. I got on a better flight." That earned a soft laugh. He reached for his cup, then paused. "You ever think of calling them?" "Every day," I said, "and every day I don't." He didn't press, just nodded and drank his coffee. When I got home that afternoon, Joyce was in the backyard spreading mulch. "Get any news?" she asked without looking up. "No," I said, and then maybe because I needed to hear it out loud, I added, "But I think they know I'm gone now." That night, I turned the phone on. It buzzed like a dying insect. 32 missed calls, 18 messages. The oldest was from Lisa, a frantic voice message from the day of their flight. "Martha, we thought you were in the bathroom. Please call us, we're boarding." A lie. The rest were more of the same. Adam's voice curt and tight. "Where are you, Mom? Another, this isn't funny." Then finally, "Fine, do what you want." I didn't respond, I wasn't ready, but I saved Kieran's number. That much I could do. The next day he called. I stared at the screen, watched his name blink, and for the first time I answered, "Grandma." His voice cracked like he wasn't sure if I'd speak. "I'm here, darling." A long pause, then, "You're okay. I'm better than okay. Where are you? Somewhere quiet? Somewhere I chose?" He didn't beg. He didn't guilt me. He just said, "I'm glad you're safe. I miss you." "I miss you too." That was enough for now. No explanations, no apologies, just the sound of someone who still wanted me in their life. Not because I made birthday cakes or babysat on weekends, but because I mattered. And that sound, soft, simple, sincere, meant more than any seat on a plane. By the 4th week, I'd memorized the walk from the cafe to the corner pharmacy, the smell of the lilac bush outside Joyce's neighbor's yard, and the sound of Arthur's knock on the cafe window. When I forgot his cream. Life was not exciting, but it was whole. It had shape, it had peace, and then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, a letter came in the mail. Joyce slid it across the kitchen table without comment. The return address was Wilmington, my old home. The handwriting was familiar in the way a bruise is familiar. Something you recognize by the ache it leaves behind. Adam. The envelope was thick. Inside 6 pages of neat, angry script. No greeting. Just, "I can't believe you did this." He accused me of disappearing, of making a scene by absence, of putting the family through stress during their vacation. "Lisa cried every night," he wrote. "The kids were confused. Do you think that was fair to them?" Not a word about the airport lounge, not a word about asking me to wait. No mention of the 8 hours, just the performance of pain, the rewriting of facts. He ended the letter with, "We're willing to talk, but only if you're ready to be reasonable." Reasonable, as if decades of babysitting, cooking, paying their bills, and being told where to sit and when to be quiet had been unreasonable. as if disappearing was a tantrum, not a choice. I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. Joyce didn't ask what it said. She only passed me a plate of toast and nodded toward the window. "Storm's coming," she said. It was. The next morning, Kieran called again. "I heard Dad wrote to you." "He did. You going to respond?" I was quiet for a moment, then, "No, not yet. Maybe not at all." Kieran didn't argue. "I get it. He told me he'd started a job at a bookstore, part-time, low pay. But I like it," he said. "Books don't yell at you." We laughed easy and warm. "You sound different," he said at the end of the call. Different how? Lighter. That night, I took the letter from Adam, lit a match, and fed it to the kitchen sink flame by flame. Joyce didn't flinch. "I would have used the fire pit," she said, more satisfying. At the cafe the next morning, Heather pulled me aside. "You want an extra shift this weekend? Saturday brunch is hell." I said yes before thinking. Not because I needed the money, though it helped, but because I liked the feel of a full day. The ache in my feet was honest. Arthur came in late. He'd started using a cane. Nothing dramatic, just age showing up where it always does. The knees, the lower back, the pride. "You burned the place down yet?" he asked, settling into his usual stool. "Not today," I said, pouring his cup. He sipped, then paused. "You ever think about going back to Wilmington?" "To any of it?" I wiped the counter. "No, not once." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe you finally arrived." That night, Joyce surprised me. She knocked on my door holding a flyer. "Community Center is doing a potluck next week. You and I should go." I raised an eyebrow. "You go to potlucks. I go to free food and other people's gossip." She said, "Don't read into it." I smiled. "I'll make my lemon squares." "Good. I'll lie and say I made them." The days were getting shorter now. Dusk settled earlier, curling around the house like an old quilt. I made tea and sat by the window with my crossword book. Franklin purred at my feet. My coat hung by the door, warm and ready. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone waiting for life to start again. It had already started quietly without permission, and it was mine. Saturday brunch at the cafe was chaos. By 8 a.m., the line was out the door. The coffee urn was groaning, and the pancake griddle hissed like it had something to prove. Heather moved like a woman in a war zone, snapping orders, flipping tickets, and slapping spoons into syrup containers with practiced violence. Eggs over hard. "Booth 3, she barked. I didn't flinch. "Refill on 6. "Already done." By 10, my feet felt like stone, but my head was clear. There's a strange comfort in service. You stop thinking about yourself because you're thinking about everyone else. And in that, sometimes you find a kind of peace. Arthur didn't come in. Saturdays weren't his days. But as I wiped down the corner booth, I caught sight of something that made my breath pause. A face at the window, younger than Arthur, sharper around the jaw. But the eyes, those eyes, I knew. Lisa, she stood outside for only a second. Her coat was too nice for the drizzle, her expression unreadable. She didn't come in, just turned and walked away. I said nothing to Heather, finished my shift, counted my tips, and walked home slowly in the fading afternoon. The sidewalk shimmered with leftover rain. My coat held the warmth of movement. My hands didn't tremble. At the house, Joyce was out. A note on the fridge said, "Library talk on bees. Back at 7, don't wait on dinner unless you're cooking." I made soup anyway. That night, I turned the phone back on. 3 new voicemails. The first from Lisa. "We saw someone who looked like you. Please call us. Adam's worried." The second, Adam. "Tur. If this is about punishing us, it's gone too far. Enough is enough." The third, Kieran. "Hi, Grandma. I think Mom's in town. She's been weird all day. If something happened, please be careful." I stared at the screen. The past had a way of sniffing you out just when your back was turned. That night, I slept lightly. Every creak in the floor, every groan of the old pipes felt louder than usual, but nothing happened. Sunday passed quietly. On Monday, Arthur returned. He settled onto his stool, cane hooked on the backrest. "Busy weekend?" he asked. "Eventful," I said. He stirred his coffee. "Something bothering you?" "Yeah, but not enough to ruin this moment." He smiled and we sat in silence for a while, the way only 2 people who've seen enough can do. After work, I sat with Joyce on the porch, both of us wrapped in old sweaters, watching the clouds roll over. "I think they're looking for me," I said. I figured. She didn't ask what I was going to do. She didn't offer advice. Just passed me the wine mug. "You still hiding or healing?" "Healing," I said. But the hiding was nice while it lasted. She raised her mug. "To people who stop asking for permission." I clinked it gently. Later that night, I wrote a letter. Not to Adam, not to Lisa, to Kieran. A real letter in pen on thick paper. I told him I was safe, that I'd made a new life, that I wasn't angry, just done waiting. I told him he was the only one who never made me feel like an obligation. I told him he could visit one day if he came alone. It arrived on a Thursday, the envelope from Wilmington. But this time, it wasn't a letter from Adam or Lisa. It was a manila folder, bulky, stiff, with the return address of a regional news outlet I recognized from the old neighborhood. Joyce handed it to me with her eyebrows raised. "You got fans now?" I didn't answer. I opened it slowly, standing at the kitchen counter. Inside, a printout of a newspaper article folded in thirds. Front page of the community section. The headline read, "Missing Matriarch, Family Speaks Out on Grandmother's Disappearance." There was a photo of me taken from some family gathering years ago, holding a pie dish, smiling without showing teeth. The article quoted Adam. "We're deeply worried," and he said. "She vanished without a word. We just want her safe. If anyone sees her, please let us know." Lisa had a quote too. "She's vulnerable. We fear something happened. She's not the type to do something like this." I laughed out loud. A sharp, startled sound that startled even me. "Not the type." Joyce leaned over my shoulder and read a few lines. "They really said vulnerable." I nodded. "You should sue them for underestimating you. They'll have to stand in line." There was something obscene about it. This performance of concern, of innocence. As if I'd wandered off into traffic. As if I hadn't been parked like a suitcase and abandoned before boarding. Heather saw the article too. Someone at the cafe left it on the counter by accident. She brought it to me during the morning rush. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "Never better." I kept the clipping, not out of sentiment, but because it was proof. Proof that people only start worrying when they can't use you anymore. That night, I sat with Arthur in the booth by the window. He didn't ask about the article. He just handed me a little brown paper bag. "I saw this and thought of you," he said. "Inside a tiny hand-painted magnet shaped like a birdhouse." "It's silly," he added quickly. "I just remembered something you said." I smiled. "It's not silly. It's perfect." When I got home, I stuck it to the fridge with the same hand that had carried Adam's lunch to school 100 times. The same hand that had paid his rent more than once. The same hand that would not ever again reach out for more abuse. I didn't tell Joyce about the magnet. Some things you keep for yourself. Instead, I told her I'd like to bake something for the potluck after all. "Lemon squares?" she asked. "No, I said something better." The next day, I pulled out my old recipe box, the one I'd saved, even when I sold nearly everything else. I found the card written in Derek's handwriting, back from our first Thanksgiving together. "Martha's sweet potato cake, good enough to make people behave." I baked too, the house filled with cinnamon and memory. Joyce danced in the kitchen in thick socks. Franklin meowed like he'd been promised a slice. When we brought the cakes to the community center, a woman at the door said, "What's that smell?" "It's divine." "New life," Joyce said before I could answer. We both laughed, and I didn't feel small. I felt real, rooted, ready. And somewhere, probably Adam and Lisa were wondering how they'd lost control of the woman they never really saw. Let them wonder. The community potluck was held in the basement of a church that smelled faintly of old hymnals and pines. Folding tables lined the walls covered in plastic cloths and mismatched dishes. A woman with a gray braid and clipboard directed traffic like a general in an apron. Joyce and I arrived 10 minutes early, cakes carefully balanced in her arms. I carried the utensils and napkins. It had been years since I walked into a room where I didn't know a soul and didn't care. "You go find a table," Joyce said. "I'll handle introductions." I stood by the coffee station, warming my hands around a paper cup. People trickled in slowly, mostly women in thick sweaters and sensible shoes. A few men who hovered near the food like it might vanish if they blinked. Someone tapped my shoulder. "Did you bring the sweet potato cake?" I turned. A woman with kind eyes and a sturdy frame smiled at me. "I did." "God bless you," she said. I thought Clara Porter was bringing her dump cake again. "Yours smells like someone still knows what the holidays taste like." I chuckled. I've been known to cook under pressure. The evening was slow and loud in the way small gatherings always are. People talking over folding chairs, passing dishes down long tables, laughter popping like firecrackers. My cake disappeared before the prayer was done. Someone asked for the recipe. I said it was classified. Around the halfway mark, Joyce introduced me to a retired school librarian named Marcia and a former bus driver named Terry. They invited us to join their monthly trivia night. I told them I'd only go if the questions were from before 1990. Later, during dessert, Joyce leaned over and whispered, "You look smug." "I feel smug," I said. It had been so long since I was part of something that didn't ask me to prove my worth first. Back home, we kicked off our shoes and flopped onto the couch. Franklin settled on my lap, heavy and warm. Joyce turned to me. You know they're going to show up raw, right? I didn't answer. She said it again, softer, sooner or later. I know. And I did. The letter, the article, Lisa's face outside the cafe, they were warning shots, and I was tired of being on alert. The next morning, a man in a suit stood outside the cafe. He waited until my shift ended, then stepped inside, removed his sunglasses, and said, "Are you Mrs. Martha Harlow?" I didn't like the tone. Too formal, too careful. I am. My name is Derek Sorensen. I represent Adam and Lisa Harlow. They've asked me to speak with you regarding your well-being and your assets. I blinked. My well-being is excellent, I said, and my assets are none of your business. He shifted uncomfortably. They're very concerned, Mrs. Harlow. They'd like to ensure you're in a safe environment, possibly discuss some next steps. I folded my apron and placed it on the counter. Tell Adam and Lisa I'm not a pet. They forgot to pick up, and there are no next steps unless I take them. He cleared his throat. If you just consider, I've considered enough. I walked past him and out the door, leaving him blinking in the light. Arthur was waiting outside. He didn't look like he came for coffee. He said he didn't. You okay? Yes, I said, because I'm not going to let anyone convince me I'm not. That evening, I wrote one more letter. Not to Kieran this time, to Lisa. 3 lines. I know what you did. I know what you didn't say. I'm not angry. I'm not coming back. Take care of your own life now. I finally started mine. I mailed it the next morning with a stamp that had a bird on it. A finch. The kind that sings even in the cold. I expected silence or maybe eventually another letter from Adam, full of veiled demands dressed up as concern. What I didn't expect was Lisa in person. She showed up on a gray Thursday afternoon. Heather spotted her first, a woman in a tailored coat, standing stiffly by the pastry display, pretending to read the chalkboard menu. She looked out of place, polished, waiting. I didn't go to her. I finished refilling the sugar caddies, wiped the counter, and let her sweat. When she finally stepped forward, her voice was low. Martha. I turned slowly. Lisa. The cafe was nearly empty, just Arthur in the corner booth and a young couple whispering over muffin. Can we talk? She asked. You're talking now? She winced. Privately, I nodded toward the back. Booth's free. She slid into the seat across from me like a woman bracing for bad weather. I didn't know Adam was sending someone, she said. The lawyer. That wasn't my idea. No, I said. But leaving me in an airport lounge was her eyes filled genuinely, maybe for show. I couldn't tell anymore. We panicked, she said. The flight was boarding. The kids were cranky. We thought you were behind us. And then I raised an eyebrow. 8 hours, Lisa. 8 hours. You didn't call, didn't check in, didn't even ask someone at the gate. She looked down at her hands. They were perfectly manicured. Always had been. I didn't think you'd leave. I didn't. You did. Silence stretched between us like taut thread. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I don't want anything from you, she said. But Kieran, he's struggling. He misses you. Adam's furious. But Kieran, he's different. I took the envelope, not because I wanted what was inside, but because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of refusing it outright. He doesn't need a go-between, I said. He knows how to call. Lisa nodded. He might. She looked up then. Not the woman who smoothed over dinner parties and smiled through gritted teeth, just tired, small. I wasn't trying to replace you, she said quietly. I just didn't want your shadow in every room. That was the closest thing to honesty I'd ever heard from her. I stood. I'm not your shadow, Lisa. I'm my own person, and I finally remembered how to be one. She left without finishing her coffee. That night, Joyce and I sat on the porch wrapped in blankets. The air smelled like rain and wood smoke. She really said that? Joyce asked. I nodded. And nothing. She said her piece, I said mine. You gonna see them? No, Joyce sipped her tea. What about the boy? Kieran? I smiled. He's different. I'll see him. But on my time later, I opened the envelope. Inside a photo of Kieran as a child, me holding him on my hip in the garden, both of us laughing, tucked behind it, a note in his handwriting. I remember. I always remembered. Just 5 words, but they were enough to hold the rest of the week in place. I spent the next morning in the kitchen watching the kettle boil and thinking about the word cut. Not in the violent sense, but in the quiet. Final way, a string is snipped, a tether released. I'd spent so much of my life tied to people who assumed I'd never walk away. But I had, and every day, I didn't go back. The knot loosened a little more. That afternoon, I went to the bank. The teller was the same girl who'd cashed my first paycheck. Her name was Mari. She wore purple nail polish and always looked slightly surprised to be indoors. "I'd like to make a transfer," I said, sliding my ID across the counter. "Sure," she said. "From which account?" I gave her the number of the small one I'd opened with my old card, the one I'd used for groceries when Derek was alive, the one Adam never knew existed. "And the recipient?" I smiled. "Kieran Harlow." I handed her the routing information he'd included in his note. "It's not a huge amount," I said. "Just a little something for books or groceries or getting away if he ever needs to." Mari tapped at her keyboard. "You're the first person I've seen in months send money without strings attached." That's the point. It felt good. Not like revenge. Sharper than that, like closure. I walked out of the bank and into the crisp air. Coat button, collar up. The wind didn't bite. It nudged like a reminder. At home, Joyce was watching game shows. "You look smug again," she said without looking up. I made a decision. "Anyone die?" "Not yet," she grinned. That night, I wrote one last letter. This one wasn't for the family. It was for the lawyer, Derek Sorensen. I kept it brief. "To whom it may concern, there is no cause for further legal contact. I am of sound mind in a safe environment and not under duress. I have retained local legal counsel. Any further attempts to contact me under the guise of concern will be considered harassment. Sincerely, Martha Harlow." I signed it with a steady hand and dropped it off at the post office the next morning. That was the final cut. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. At the cafe, Heather handed me an extra shift without asking. "You're the only one who shows up early," she said. "The rest want applause for showing up at all." Arthur came in just before noon. He looked tired but steady. We sat by the window with tea instead of coffee. "You look lighter," he said. "I wrote a letter," I said, "the last one." He didn't ask what it said. He only nodded. "Sometimes it's the unsent ones that change everything," he said. "Sometimes it's the ones you send without waiting for a reply." When I got home that evening, I stood in the doorway for a moment. The house smelled like garlic and dryer sheets. Franklin padded up and head-butted my shin. Joyce looked up from the kitchen. "I made pasta." "Hope you're hungry." I was hungry, free, unafraid. Everything I hadn't been in years. Joyce turned 70 on a Tuesday. She didn't want to party. "People start singing and I want to run," she said. But I baked a chocolate cake anyway and left it on the kitchen table with 2 candles and a card that read, "You're not old, you're vintage." She laughed when she saw it. "I guess I can tolerate cake," she said, slicing it thick. That night, we sat on the porch with slices balanced on paper plates wrapped in quilts, watching the moon rise. It was a quiet celebration, the kind I never used to believe counted, but they do. Maybe more than the loud one. "You know," Joyce said, "you've been here almost 2 months." "I know. You planning to stay?" I looked out at the street, empty and soft under streetlight. "Yes," she nodded. "Good. This house is weird without someone yelling at the cat." We toasted with lukewarm tea. Franklin yawned and curled tighter between our feet. The next day, Heather gave me an envelope. "What's this? Your name's on it." No return address, but the postmark's local. I opened it after my shift, sitting on the back step behind the cafe. Inside was a letter. The handwriting was large, deliberate. "Grandma, I'm coming to Portland. I want to see you. I'm not bringing anyone. I just want to talk. I'm staying at the Red Fern Motel on Maple, room 12. If you want to come by, I'll be there Friday and Saturday. If not, I'll understand." Kieran, there was no guilt in it, no pressure, just a boy. No, a man now, reaching out with quiet hands. Friday morning came faster than expected. I dressed carefully, not for him, for me. Navy coat, clean shirt, lipstick the color of dried cherries. I didn't tell Joyce where I was going. She didn't ask. The Red Fern was modest, clean but tired. I knocked once. He opened the door like he'd been waiting with his hand on the knob. He was taller than I remembered, scruff on his jaw, shadows under his eyes, but the same gentleness in the way he looked at me. "Hi, Grandma." "Hi, sweetheart." He didn't hug me right away. He stepped back and let me in. The room smelled like takeout and hotel soap. The bed was made, but the desk was cluttered with books. He'd brought books. That said everything. We sat not too close, like we knew we needed space before warmth. "I didn't know if you'd come," he said. "I didn't know either." He nodded. "I read your letter. The one you didn't send. You left it in the drawer. Mom found it. Of course she did." "I'm glad you didn't send it," he said. "But I'm more glad you wrote it." We talked about small things, big things, how his job was going, how I liked Portland, how freedom tasted when no one was watching. I think about you a lot, he said. You were the only person who ever made me feel enough just by sitting beside me. I reached over and took his hand. You always were enough. You still are. We didn't cry, neither of us, but we breathed deeper. He didn't ask if I was coming back. I didn't ask if he was staying. We knew better than that. Before I left, he handed me a small wrapped bundle. Inside was a book of poems. I underlined the ones that made me think of you, he said. That night, I read them one by lamplight slowly. One line stayed with me. There are women who rise not from fire, but from forgetting who told them they couldn't. And I slept with the window cracked, the sound of wind soft like a second chance. The next morning, I walked to the cafe like usual. Same coat, same steps, but something was different. Not around me, in me. Kieran had gone back to the motel after breakfast. His train was at noon. We didn't say goodbye, just hugged long and quiet in the lobby while someone vacuumed in the next room. He held on the way boys do when they're not sure they're still allowed. Be good to yourself, I whispered. You too, he said, finally. At the cafe, Heather handed me a new apron. Found this in a clearance bin. Thought of you. It was deep green with stitched lettering. Not your grandma's kitchen. I laughed loud and full. Arthur looked up from his booth and raised his mug like a salute. After my shift, I walked home slowly. The sky was overcast, the air soft. Franklin greeted me at the door, already grumpy. I was late for his 2 p.m. stretch and yowl. Joyce was in the kitchen with a pot of something fragrant on the stove. You look smug again, she said. New apron, I approve. We ate in the quiet way people do when they've said everything already. No need to fill the space. Just presence. Just ease. That night, I sat on the porch with a pen and a blank card. I wrote, Dear me, you waited so long for someone to save you. You forgot you were always the one holding the key. You didn't lose them. They let go. And you finally let go back. And look at the life that opened. Well done. Love me. I taped it to the inside of my dresser drawer behind the old recipe cards, just in case I ever forget again. So that's my story. I wasn't abandoned. I was released. And I didn't rebuild my life. I built something new. If this found you at the right moment, don't wait for the perfect sign. Be your own sign, your own noise in the silence, your own step away from the airport lounge. And when you do, come back and tell me. I'll be here. And if this story moved you, share it, leave a comment. Let someone know it's never too late to choose yourself.